Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the new TextMeshPro shaders for URP and HDRP. Now these shaders are still in development and they will be included in a future release of TextMeshPro, which will also require a new version of Unity. Having said that, and as you're watching this video, I have already released these new shaders on the Unity forum for you to experiment with and to provide feedback. I will include a link to the post that contains these shaders in the description of this video. So without further ado, let's take a look at the shaders. I'm currently using Unity 2020.3.7 F1, which should be available within the next few weeks or so. I'm also using TextMeshPro version 3.2.0-Preview 1, which will also be released subsequently. Now this special version of TextMeshPro includes the custom material inspectors and the necessary changes to take full advantage of the functionality of these new shaders. So until this new package is available, the shaders that I've released on the forum are just that, which is the shaders. So you're not going to have the custom material inspectors and there'll be some functionality missing, but otherwise you should be able to play with the shaders and be able to provide feedback so that we can fine-tune them so that by the time the package is released, we have a new set of strong and feature-rich shaders for all of us. So let's start by taking a look at the URP shaders. So let's disable this game object, enable a plain text object, make the cube go away, and switch to 2D view. These new shaders will be contained in the same folder as the other TextMeshPro shaders, which is in the TextMeshPro folder shaders. There's 4 of them. There's the 2 HDRP lit and unlit, and the 2 URP lit and unlit. Then there's the SDF functions, which is custom functions for the shaders. So these shaders are basically identical to each other. The first release will be all the bells and whistles and all the features. This is so that you can play with them and see what functionality is there. And once we start getting feedback, I'm going to be looking at creating sort of reduced feature set, more optimized versions of the shaders like mobile, and then we'll figure out what shader keywords we're going to put in there. But the first set will be basically all the features piled into these shaders. These are shader graph shaders, which means you'll be able to go in there if you want to play with shader graph and figure out a bunch of that functionality, and you'll be able to make tweaks and so on and so forth. The custom material inspectors will be referenced here. So in the version that you're going to get from the forum, this field will be empty because there is no custom material inspectors. And if this was to remain full, you would get lots of errors being displayed. So let's go back to our scene. Let's select our plain text object and look at our shaders. Right now I'll be showing those with the custom material inspector, and then I'll be showing you what they look like in a project without custom material inspector. So and I'll describe each of the features so you're able to play with them even without the custom material inspectors. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on shaded wireframe just so we can see the geometry of the text objects. So with the custom material inspectors and the special version of TextMeshPro, when you do things like changing dilation, you can see that the geometry of the text adjusts as we're tweaking these material properties. Without the custom material inspectors, this is not going to happen. So you're going to have to go in the extra settings of the text object and enable extra padding to get extra room. And that might still not be enough to like cover the potential range of the material properties. But this is something that, once the new version of TextMeshPro is available, that will just work automatically. So let's take a look at each of the features. Let me reset this back to 0. As you can see, the new shader or shaders will support a face and 3 outlines plus the underlay channel. Unlike the current TextMeshPro shaders, these are now layers, so they're actually stacked on top of each other, meaning if I go 0.1 dilation here and I go 0.1 dilation here, nothing seems to happen, and that's simply because this 0.1 is covering the dilation that I added underneath it. right? So you can see here. So if I go back 0, 0.1, 0.2, and then 0.3, so the gap over each is basically 0.1. So as you can see, we have the 3 layers here. Let me turn off the extra padding just so you can see that the mesh keeps adjusting automatically. So we have 3 outline colors, 3 outline layers and their colors. Right now you can, like the existing shaders, you can texture the face and you can texture the outline. I'm looking at making tweaks where you could actually assign a texture for outline 2 and outline 3. Obviously, the more texture lookup we do, or texture reads we do, the more potential impact there is on performance. On desktop, nobody's going to really care, but on mobile devices, that becomes more costly. But that goes back to what I was describing. I'm going to release these shaders with lots of features, and then based on your feedback, we're going to pare down these features and reduce and release additional shaders. And by the way, since you have access to the shader anyway, you could yourself go and tweak and remove some of these features or even add new ones. So back to the shaders, the material properties are going to be displayed with the custom material inspector in a fashion that is similar to the existing shaders today. I wanted to keep things sort of consistent or at least close to being familiar. So we got our textures here. If I assign a texture, for example, to the outline, let's just pick like a UV grid. You can see the texture is being applied there, but it's, you know, being tinted, and we're only seeing a little part of it. So let's just boost that a little bit. So this is all operational and functional, but the texturing in the shaders available in the forum is not going to work, simply because in the new version of the TextMeshPro, and in order to work with Shader Graph, I've had to change the UV layout of the text objects and their geometry. And this is to deal with the limitation of Shader Graph, where in a normal shader we have access to the vertex shader and then the fragment shader / pixel shader. That's not currently possible with the current version of Shader Graph. So some operations that in the TMP shaders were done at the vertex level, we can't do that. And what we were doing there is the UV coordinates of textures in the current version of TextMeshPro are encoded in the X coordinate of UV2. And the shader would basically unpack the UV texture from the X coordinate and would be able to display it. But we can't do this unpacking in Shader Graph in the Vertex shader because we don't have access to it. So the geometry layout change for TextMeshPro is now UV0, X, and Y contain the glyph, the coordinates of the glyph in the atlas texture. The Z will contain the texture index. So in the future, we want to support multiple atlas textures where they're only going to take one draw call. Well, the texture index in the texture array on the shader will be in the Z, and the W is going to be the SDF scale, which used to be in the Y of UV2. So lots of technical jargon there, but that's why there's a UV change, which will also be necessary in the new version. The UV speed and all that stuff is functional. Right now I'm not in play mode, and the editor doesn't update all the time, so I have to keep moving my mouse. But this is all operational too. There's an issue in HDRP where that doesn't appear to be working, so the folks are on the HDRP front are looking into that. So let me get rid of this texture again and go back to functionality. So same thing, 3 outlines plus or underlay. So let's go back to our 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. We're going to throw in some underlay. This one is going to work as it did before, so nothing new there. These shaders, there's no, I guess, training wheels on them. So, for example, it is possible for me to do something, I guess I need to do something more, where like I can blow up the shader. So this basically means I got to an illegal SDF value. The old shaders used to kind of try to, you know, like I was saying, training wheels to prevent you from doing stuff like that. But it added additional complexity to the shaders. Some of that stuff was also handled in the vertex shader, which we can't do anymore. So I did away with all of that. So you're going to have to be careful when you're tweaking values that you don't end up with something that just blows up the shader as I'm showing here. Another example would be, I'll show that like right now. So let me go back to 0.3. So I'll just readjust the underlay, just move it a little bit closer, dilate it here. So new functionality that was added is the ability to offset each of the layers. So what does that mean? So it means I can move, let's say, the blue layer. Well, this is the white. Let me change this color because that's not too obvious. So let's make it yellow. Here I can offset the layer independently of the other ones. But if I go too far, you can see that we're now exceeding our padding value inside the glyph and the atlas texture, which is why it's starting to show up all over the place. So same thing, no training wheels, just make sure when you're tweaking values that you're paying attention, and if this happens, that's why. The padding value is basically 10 in this font asset, and as I get past 10, then we're trying to show pieces of the glyph adjacent to the one that we're already manipulating, or the ones on screen. So this is what happens when we do that. But let's do something cooler as opposed to showing potential limitations. So this offset could be like, this is sort of what underlay does already, but it was added to this so you can create cool visual effects such as this, for example. So let's say we're trying to fake a 3D letter in 2D. So what we could do is say, okay, this is going to be our face color. We'll make it kind of yellowish. We're going to say this is our highlight. So I'm going to make it white. And I'll offset this like a little bit on this side and move it up like so. And I added dilation. I can get rid of it. So let's just offset it a little bit more. So this would represent our white highlight. This one I'm going to use to fake the 3D. So I'll make it sort of a darker orange. And I will move it on the other side like so and move it down. So we're kind of trying to fake like a 3D look. And now our black outline, let me go back and make this 0.1 so it's not so big. Move it back up. Now you're seeing me like messing around with shaders or trying to be artistic, which I'm not too much. So here we have our outline channel, which is like underneath, and it would be cool if it could encompass everything. Like, yeah, I could play with dilation, but it's still kind of odd. So there's this new feature, outline mode, and what this does is it adds it to contour everything else. So if I zoom out, you can see my bad attempt at making text look like 3D, or text with the word text look like 3D, which is what we're seeing here. It's kind of, it's kind of a cool feature, and it was suggested by a user in the forum. So this is some of the capabilities that you're going to have. And again, because these are done in Shader Graph, you'll be able to, if you wanted, you could add additional layers too, and look at how they're currently implemented and add more. So this is what we've got here. Let's disable this guy and look at a different example of 3D text that I did. So this one here, instead of using the unlit shader, is simply using the lit version of the shader with different material properties being tweaked. So no big deal there. So it's pretty cool what you can do. This is a simple scene here where if I go back to 3D or perspective, let's go back to our glowy effect. On the shaders, so this is an attempt to kind of do glow. So you'll notice that the shaders, like the current sets, do have a bevel, and they do have lighting settings that we can tweak. So if I let's make sure I pick the right one. So I can play with all these different values and so on and so forth, but there's no glow. And the reason there's no glow, and I could always add one, this is again back to getting feedback, we could add a glow which would be an emissive color, But right now with URP and HDRP, we can add post-processing like bloom, which is how this is done. And there's a trick in here where, let me adjust that so it's nicer to see. You can see there's like a gap in between all these things, and that's simply I took the first outline channel and I made it fully transparent. So as you can see, it now suddenly shows up. So there's all kinds of tricks you're going to be able to do with layering to pull off like an offset on this channel. And the way it blooms, so this is not glow, it's a bloom effect. The way that it blooms is by pushing the intensity value in HDRP to a higher level. Like if I bring it down, you can see it's just a plain color. But with bloom, if we pump the value, then it makes it glow even more. And you have to add like a volume component to do that. And there is like settings you can play with to change the intensity. So you can do some pretty crazy stuff. And I'm sure some of you will make like beautiful looking things with this. Again, my artistic skills are somewhat limited. So this gives you a good sense of the shader. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video. Actually, let's not pause yet. Let's switch to HDRP. So this is same version of Unity, different project, looks the same, but right now I'm in HDRP. So if I go back, the material inspectors will look the same. Now it's the HDRP lit shader. The whole idea of creating material presets remains the same thing. You'll be able to create your material presets the same way you always have done it. So here with HDRP, we can see, you know, the backside of the text with the cool lighting. We can see that in my scene, I have 3 lights. Well, I have 4, green, blue, and red. And you can see in the shadow the colors showing up. On the backside, I have another light, which is illuminating the backside. And in HDRP, you do have control over like the backside of the text, whether or not it's double-sided. If the backside is basically none, which means it's lit identically to the front, versus if we flip the normals in the back, then it takes the backside lighting. So again, you can do all this stuff. Now the custom material inspectors for HDRP actually require a change in HDRP. So there'll be a new version of HDRP that's going to make it possible to use the custom material inspectors. But that should all line up together as I release that special version of TextMeshPro, the first preview, and then HDRP will have an update and so on and so forth. So let me pause this and switch the project to one where we don't have the custom material inspectors. Okay, so we're now back into a different project. This is the base URP project, Universal Render Pipeline. And the way you're going to get these shaders from the forum in your project is I created a Unity package, which is, well, I guess we can't see it here. So it's just a normal Unity package, and you're going to drag it in your project, and then this window will pop up and it will show you the shaders. I already have them, but this is how you're going to import them. So without the custom material inspector, this is what it looks like, which is somewhat intimidating. So I will describe what each of these features or what each of these labels mean so you can relate to what it is with the normal material inspector. So face color, pretty obvious face color. Outline width, so this is your face, outline 1, 2, and 3, which is what we're seeing here on screen. Let me zoom in a nicer fashion and disable the grid in the background. Then you've got outline color 1, 2, 3, pretty clear. Outline offset, so this is the offsets for your outline 1, 2, and 3. Outline mode, this is the toggle where the outline will encompass all the letters when I did the fake 3D stuff. Softness, same thing, softness for the face, outline 1, 2, and 3. UV speed is the UV speed I showed with the other custom material inspector. Face text ST is the tiling and the UV offset for the face texture. Same thing for the outline and outline texture, underlay color, underlay offset. then we've got dilation, and then these are pretty straightforward. Each of the render pipelines has their own additional features like render queue, GPU instancing, and all that stuff. And if I switch to this one here, which is HDRP, same thing, you can see that it's the same properties that are being exposed, but then with HDRP you have more stuff to click through. There are some issues right now, like if I remember correctly, if I go to double-sided, I think that's fine. But there's stuff that there's issues, and the HDRP team is going to be working at fixing these various bugs and challenges. But it's, the shaders are functional. You'll be able to play with them. You may get, without the new package, some errors because the text object doesn't, the version you have of TextMeshPro, the text objects themselves don't necessarily understand some of these new properties. So you may get some errors showing up. They're not, horrible errors. They're not going to crash anything, but you may get some errors. So this is sort of a preview of the new URP and HDRP shaders. If I go back to the other project with the custom material inspector and go to the unlit shader, for example, just to give you a quick overview. So the new shaders don't use SDF scale. They use what we call screen space derivative. So no SDF scaling needs to be passed for them. So for VR applications and all that, they're a lot more convenient, and the text will always be rendered nicely. But this adds a slight performance overhead. So this is something you want to be aware of. Here you can see the setup where we have our face with the 3 outlines plus the underlay. This is our face texture, the outline texture. This is when we're faking normals with the fake lighting and beveling. This is where it's handled. The underlay itself, the compositing of it is there. So you can see how the shader is set up in Shader Graph. The shader does have custom functions, which are like, layer 4, and they're all here, and these all come in this SDF functions. So I will end it at this because we're at 20 minutes already. So please play with the shaders, provide some feedback in terms of the functionality and what's in there. Like I said, I think I'm going to be adding the ability to set an outline for 2 and 3, like different textures that you'll be able to set there. And think about bloom versus glow and experiment with that, which will require that you use the volume, and see if we need to sort of add the glow into this. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed, and look forward to your feedback. As usual, thank you.